Thank you, Paul.
Welcome. You're most
Good to
welcome.
see you. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for that very kind introduction. This is, I think, a much more hospitable audience than some that I'm faced with in Washington, given our politics nowadays. But good afternoon to all of you. And for over 50 years, the Confederation of British Industry has been the UK's most effective and influential business organizations because it speaks on behalf of almost 200,000 businesses of all sizes. Together, you employ nearly 7 million people, about a third of the British private sector workforce. And as a former businessman myself, I appreciate the value of organizations like CBI that represent the views of the private sector and help foster job growth. I'm delighted to be making my first official visit to London as Commerce Secretary. So thank you for inviting me to speak here today. I'm proud to say that President Trump has the most rational approach to business of any recent American president. In 2016, voters in the United States called for a change in U.S. regulatory, tax, and trade policy. The American people were tired of our prior trade policy and had lost faith in the series of deals that never delivered on their promises. On the contrary, our trade agreements helped to gut the American manufacturing sector and the destruction of hundreds of thousands of jobs. President Trump called for a new approach, and the administration will deliver on that promise. Our unilateral concessions to the WTO were even worse. So the guiding principle behind our actions now in this area will be to expand trade in a way that is free, fair, and reciprocal. Our main approach will be to remove tariff and non-tariff barriers to market access. But we also will vigilantly enforce the rules. We have brought 61% more trade cases this year than the prior administration did during the same period last year. Our actions will increase economic growth, promote job creation, foster reciprocity with our trading partners, strengthen our manufacturing base, and buttress our industrial security. These goals, we believe, can best be accomplished by focusing on bilateral agreements and negotiations. They are simpler and faster to negotiate and can be tailored to individual needs. President Trump places an especially great deal of emphasis on our bilateral trade with the UK. The relationship between the US and the UK has never been stronger. Our two nations have long enjoyed a partnership, and it was strengthened during both world wars and many other global conflicts thereafter, including Iraq and Afghanistan. The UK and the US frequently consult with each other on foreign policy issues and global problems as we pursue our many shared objectives the world over. In January, Prime Minister May was the first foreign visitor to greet President Trump in Washington. And during that visit, our president stated, quote, "The special relationship between our two countries has been one of the great forces in history for justice and for peace. Together, America and the United Kingdom are a beacon for prosperity and the rule of law." And he correctly declared that great days lie ahead for our two peoples and our two countries. We share deep bonds across the board, militarily, culturally, and linguistically. The UK is our 7th largest trading partner, with nearly $230 billion in bilateral trade, more or less evenly split between goods and services. The United States and the UK are also the largest single investors in each other's markets, at a total of $1.2 trillion. And I can tell you, 1.2 trillion is a big number even in Washington. The UK has cumulative investments of $598 billion in the US, and those investments generate $73 billion of US exports. And they support over 1 million US jobs and have resulted in almost $8 billion in R&D spending by US affiliates of UK firms. UK investment represents roughly 35% of the EU's total investment in the United States. Meanwhile, the US investment position in the UK is roughly $682 billion, which also sustains 1 million jobs here in the UK. Our relationship can be even stronger. We want more trade and more investment, and we want to be your #1 trading partner worldwide. We can make this happen because of our shared interests and our strong commitments to one another. Our companies are well positioned to provide the skilled labor force, innovation, and technically sophisticated equipment necessary for future success. We also are both extremely dependent on services, and the US and the UK have a great deal to gain by continuing our cooperation in e-commerce, a field to which we have long shared a similar approach. Although good work is already being done to integrate many of our sectors, I am convinced that a historic trade deal between our countries would bolster this already strong partnership. President Trump is very supportive of such a deal and has repeatedly engaged with Prime Minister May on this important topic. While we cannot negotiate a free trade agreement until the UK exits the European Union, we are holding preliminary scoping discussions on how to strengthen our economic ties in support of job creation and growth in both our economies. To that end, we have created a trade and investment working group, which brings together our respective trade and industry experts. It held its first meeting in July in Washington and is due to meet again in London next week. I am confident that this dialogue will bear fruit and put us in a good position for eventual trade talks. There will likely be near-term developments in individual sectors such as aviation. We already have a good starting point for such discussions, since both of our governments believe in creating a level playing field on which our companies can compete in an open and transparent manner. I know from my many discussions with the private sector that the removal of both tariff and non-tariff barriers will be a critical component of any trade discussion between us. This is something we really can accomplish together. We must reduce unnecessary divergences in regulations and standards that many of our companies, especially our small and medium-sized enterprises, face. These are key impediments to expanded trade between the U.S. and the EU, something we hope to be able to quickly fix between our two countries. The U.S. industries have identified the following as some of the key hindrances to increasing U.S. exports to the EU, and potentially ones that the UK could help solve if you don't simply adopt EU trade policy in its entirety. Limited or no access to the EU standard-setting process is one problem. The second is a lack of transparency and a lack of ability to participate in the regulatory process. Third, the limited role of science in assessing risk, especially in sanitary and phytosanitary matters. Next, potential barriers to trade and investment in the digital space. And finally, EU tariffs are generally quite a bit higher than ours. I would like to share some examples of where there is lots of room to work together to increase trade once Brexit is concluded. They reflect our mutual desire for high product safety standards and consumer protection for our citizens. The United States, for example, is the largest supplier of medical devices to the UK, with a 20% market share of a total market of $11.1 billion in 2015. The sector is an important employer for both countries, with over 80% of U.S. firms in that sector represented by small and medium-sized enterprises. We share a common goal of ensuring that medical device companies consistently produce safe and effective products. Both of our regulatory regimes stress the importance of good manufacturing and design control processes. But importantly, we must guard against unnecessary regulatory divergences that would necessitate superfluous bureaucracy and costs, and potentially prevent patient access to the latest treatments. Turning to automobiles, vehicles in the EU undergo a so-called type approval process, where models are tested and certified by the member state regulators for compliance as a complete vehicle prior to entering the market. By contrast, in the United States, we favor self-certification to meet safety standards with post-market verification by US regulators. Finally, the EU tariff on autos is 10%. The US tariff is 2.5%. This spread partially explains our major trade deficit with the EU. Data localization is another area. The US has worked out the Privacy Shield framework with the EU. That is currently working well and is managed by our Commerce Department. We recently underwent a favorable audit by the EC and already have 2,533 signatories and are adding more almost daily. For the UK, agreeing to the framework to which you are already an inadvertent participant and becoming instead an advertent participant would eliminate what could otherwise be a big debate with the EU. Next, chemical exports to the EU require burdensome documentation and registration, and geographic indicators on food products constitute additional artificial trade barriers. All of this is to say that as the UK stands on the edge of the major changes coming with Brexit, we stand ready to use this opportunity to support our friends across the pond and to deepen our ties even further. But while Brexit opens up the prospect of such trade talks, it also provides a challenge. CBI, as you know, has weighed in on the Brexit debate with various recommendations on how to ensure that Brexit is as frictionless as possible for business. Your proposal for an extended transition period has certainly attracted lots of attention, and it is essential for private sector to continue to have a regular dialogue with Her Majesty's government in order to share concerns and ideas. The US industry has a large stake in Brexit, and it has asked the Commerce Department to work closely with Her Majesty's government to minimize disruption in trade flows between the UK and the US. Our companies recognize that their future commercial relationship with both the EU and the UK will be shaped by how these negotiations conclude. It is also important that an eventual Brexit agreement takes into account our commercial interests and does not hinder development of a closer post-Brexit US-UK relationship by continuing divergent standards and regulations and other protectionist measures. Remember that the EU talks free trade, but actually is highly protectionist. On the vast majority of major products, their tariffs far exceed those of the US. And I think many British citizens got a wake-up call over the weekend when The Guardian put on its front page the analysis that in the absence of any kind of agreement with the EU, the average British household's costs would go up by some £930 per year. That shows you the impact of their tariff structure could have on you in the absence of a reasonable agreement. But let me be clear, despite what challenges may lie ahead, the UK will continue to be a valuable partner post-Brexit, both bilaterally and on the world stage. Later today, I'm traveling to China to lead a 29-company U.S. trade delegation. U.S. and U.K. companies both hope for strong potential business with China, but significant headwinds hamper their continued growth. These companies look for China to reform, to rebalance, and to open up its economy. China's Party Congress meetings last month demonstrated the clear vision and planning that China's leaders have brought to bear in building that country to what it is today. But now that President Xi has consolidated his power, the question is, how will his new policies evolve? Will he agree to put more pressure on North Korea? Will he become less protectionist or more? We will know the answers in a few days. But whatever the outcome, I can assure you that the U.S. is not withdrawing from Asia, not at all. In fact, the President has developed an Indo-Pacific strategy that is more inclusive geographically than TPP would have been. We withdrew from a flawed deal, not from the region, not at all. The President wouldn't be going on such a grueling trip if he were not extremely determined to enhance our regional relationships there. And so I wish you the best as you conclude this conference and look forward to our further collaboration as we strengthen our mutual commercial relationships. They are the envy of the world. Thank you for your attention.
So, look, I just hear the planes ready to take off at Heathrow Airport, but maybe just one question. I guess we've been reflecting recently on the debate about Boeing and Bombardier. What do you think that tells us about the context of the relationship between the USA and the UK?
It's a very good question, and I think there has not been as much thoughtful response to it, so I'm happy to try to provide that. We have several feelings. One, even our best friends must abide by the rules. And so to us, the real question is there subsidy? Is there the potential dumping of those aircraft into the U.S. market? Preliminarily, our determination has been in the affirmative. And while it's normally true that the final determination, which is some weeks away, normally more or less follows the preliminary, it doesn't always. We just had a case last week where the preliminary determination had been severely against Thailand for some fiber exports to the U.S. The final determination, after review of the facts, came out and justified what Thailand had done and imposed no tariffs. So the one thing I can assure you is that that particular case, like all the others, will be handled in a fair, transparent, professional, and even-handed way, not some sort of backdoor, opaque arrangement. So that, but in terms of the broader picture, you should draw no conclusion from that, however it turns out. We understand the political sensitivity both here and in Canada. We understand about short in Northern Ireland. We get all that. But the fundamentals remain. Even our best friends really have to play by the rules. We intend to, and we intend that you will do so.
I'm conscious of time. We could discuss this all afternoon. The one thing that's a gift about a businessman is he'll give you a straight answer, even if you don't like it. So we're very grateful for your time. Really appreciate it. Wish you a very successful trip to China.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Real pleasure.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Carol, good to see you. So, oh yes, indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, look, we're under a bit of pressure on time, but we have got the next session, which proved to be hugely successful last time, which was interviews in pairs of people. All of you, the feedback was you thoroughly enjoyed it. So, at phenomenal expense, we've pulled together for this afternoon an absolutely stellar lineup to be challenged, to be questioned, and engaged by a presenter that every home has for tea. Very frequently, he's interviewed, I think, just about every business leader in his time in the UK. And I know enough about him to keep talking for as long as it takes for the stage to be set. But of course, he is from Sky News. He is the brilliant Ian King. Ian, you're very welcome, and I hand over to you. Ian King, thank you.
All right.
Great to see you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've all enjoyed the conference so far. It's been a pretty exciting event. Now, this next session is called Using Technology as an Enabler for Growth. Every single person in this room will no doubt be experiencing an element of disruption in their business, either in their own specific company or in their industry or their sector. And certainly with my 25 years or so in the news business, I've never seen a time like this. It's a time of monumental change. What we're going to be doing in this session is exploring disruption, how companies can take advantage of it, how they're using disruptive technologies, and what we're going to be bringing you are a pair of executives, and in each case, they are collaborating with each other to use disruptive technology and try and find ways